Hey, Print Hustlers, welcome back to Print Hustlers.
Did you forget?
Hold on. Hey, Print Hustlers, welcome back to Printavo, Print Hustlers podcast. I'm your host, Bruce from Printavo. We got Mr. Stephen Farag out of Campus Inc. We've got our CEO, actually, CEO of Printavo and Inksoft now, James Armijo, coming up on the show. Pretty cool, actually. He's just a boss, and I'm not trying to suck up to my manager here, but we're talking about professionalizing your business, leveling up ourselves as leaders, and very tactical, because I hate like going too vague in this stuff. It's like, do the best thing you can, but it's like, here's really tactical stuff that you can start doing. But real quick, we've got some awesome sponsors that we want to talk about, and make sure you are at Print Hustlers Conf. We've sold about 110 tickets so far, so super exciting.
Ooh. Bruce, what's the format this year? Tell us about that.
So we've got Saturday, November 5th. That's going to be great because people come in, start around 2 to 3. We've got Printavo training, a ton of best practices training that we're going on with e-commerce, with Power Scheduler, with API stuff, just all really cool, neat things that you want to be able to see and check out. We'll maybe share some roadmap stuff there too. Then at night, we've got a welcome dinner planned. So come hang out, come talk, come meet a bunch of other people. Sunday, a little bit different, but Sunday is a bunch of speakers. We got a ton of different speakers from different areas, very industry heavy, very tactical, very excited about that. And we're going to be sending out more snippets of who's joining, but about 90% buttoned up. And then Sunday, we've got a tour. We're buttoning up that as well. We're buttoning up a lot of things. But that's going to be really neat and a neat screen printing shop in the area that a lot of folks want to see. Printhustlers.com, grab your tickets and use the promo code last year, all one word.
Ooh.
With a little discount on it. So thank you. All right. Okay. Real quick sponsors. Though, we got to thank 4 awesome, amazing sponsors that if you're looking for different services or supplies, please check them out because they are supporting this space. And they produce some really great products. So first up, EasyWay.
You shouldn't spend all day cleaning dirty screens. EasyWay's line of environmentally conscious chemicals will get the job done faster, more efficiently, and will cost you a fraction of the cost per screen. It's turning into a jingle. We got to turn it into a song. But seriously, we use EasyWay every day in our shop, and it is the easiest way. So thank you, EasyWay. We appreciate you. Bruce, Multicraft.
Multicraft Daddy. Where's Multicraft Daddy at? How many followers does he have? Can you look it up?
I'll check.
Right, I'll check. If you need ink supplies or a daddy, Multicraft screen printing and digital supplies for over 50 years have been providing you with top brands at competitive prices. But this is really cool because you can mention the Printavo podcast and receive an extra 10% off your first order. So check out Multicraft. They are great.
Dave has 465 followers.
God damn. All right.
Thanks, Dave. We're proud of you. Dave. Keep it up. Keep it up. Awesome. Dave put out a pretty funny video the other day. He's really leaning into it. We're really proud of him. Keep it up, Dave.
Social media master Dave. GraphX Source.
Bruce, do you need a solution to improve efficiency and reduce costs in your art department?
I'd love that.
If you go to 1-900-HOTStuff.com, you'll find 2 beautiful human beings. Graphic Source offers industry-leading outsource options for your shop by truly becoming part of your team. They plug and play with Printavo and other shop management softwares when it comes to SEPs, mockups, creative art, order management, embroidery, digitizing, back office admin, and customer service. There's no better company in our industry to work with. With over 30 years in the game, they really know and understand shop needs and have a proven track record of success. Hit up Graphic Source for your art staffing needs. Mention the Printavo pod. Get 50% off your first vector, SEP, or embroidery order. We actually just brought on another team member from GraphX to help us in back office. They're going to be building online stores, order entry, all that kind of stuff. So thanks, GraphX team. We appreciate you. And I think sponsors of Print Hustlers. Can I announce that?
Oops, sorry. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. GraphX is a huge sponsor and awesome partner to work with. Mention Printavo pod, 50% off your first order. Vector, SEPs, and embroidery. I actually just use them to refer them for helping a friend with a sports logo. So that was cool. They were fast and the stuff was really good quality.
Speaking of fast, have you heard of Supacolor? Supacolor is the world's best heat transfer made by screen printers for screen printers. Supacolor understands firsthand the pressures and expectations of the screen printing business. That's why they pride themselves on being super fast and super easy. We use Supacolor every day in our shop. Their color gamuts are spot on. They ship really quickly all over the United States, and you can experience them for yourself using promo code Printavo15 and get 15% off. Thank you so much to the Supacolor team for always supporting us and being an awesome sponsor. Thanks.
Love it. All right, guys, let's go. Hey, Print Hustlers, welcome back to the Printavo Print Hustlers podcast. Thank you so much for being able to join us again. We've got a very special guest, Mr. James Armijo, our CEO, Mr. CEO, Mr. Worldwide. He is our CEO of Printavo and Inksoft, of which we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, just some really cool experience here. I was supposed to play this sound intro while I was doing this, but I realized it's actually harder to hit this button. So a little bit of backstory here. So last year, as a lot of folks know listening, Printavo and Inksoft partnered with the same private equity firm called Blue Star Innovation Partners based out of Dallas, and PSG Equity, they're out of Boston. And part of that was, how do we be able to look at both businesses to be able to use the synergies of both and be able to continue to grow and help this space? And then also, how do we bring in more experienced people to be able to help drive the business forward and take us to the next level? And what I call really professionalizing the business. And we've talked about this a lot. So that's the stage I'm going to set. James has been a CEO. I had to look on your LinkedIn, a VP, a director, just all of everything from operations, success, sales, just a lot of things. And so I think there's a level of, how do we make our businesses better with somebody who comes from the more clean cut world? Okay.
The non-screen printing world, Bruce? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
James, I think this is really interesting simply because Bruce and I have been talking about this for a really long time, about how, owners of companies aren't necessarily supposed to be the CEOs, but they just kind of end up there. And then they're like, oh my God, I don't know how to run this company. I'm just here. Tell us a little bit about, you came into an industry I don't think you've printed before. How many tattoos do you have? No, I'm just kidding. Were you a touring musician?
So I have a unique perspective on screen printing. Which I know everybody likes music, and I'm not bashing music. I love music too, but I'm an avid runner and cyclist, and so I love race T-shirts. And so I've always been fascinated by this industry because every time you do a race, you get a new shirt. Usually, that now hats are kind of becoming the thing, but that's been my perspective. So no, I never owned a printing shop, but I have a great collection of race T-shirts and some awesome favorites, but made by some pretty cool shops.
So what made you interested in this industry? Because it is, when people say, like, I've heard Bruce explain, yeah, I run a software company that helps manage print shops, and people are kind of like, huh?
T-shirt.
What made you interested in it when the opportunity approached itself?
Yeah, so I won't belabor the point, but I've spent I basically have worked in 3 companies, all of which sold software to small businesses. And I worked at this company called Cario for a while. We made software for small doctors' offices, and I worked at a company called Smart Care, which made software for daycare centers. And now, obviously, here making software for print shops. What all 3 of those had in common, and what is the kind of common vein that attracted me to this opportunity, is that they're all in industries where you have independent businesses, right? Typically like owned by the founder, or, maybe multi-generational, but still pretty small. And sometimes there's a few big, like super corporate-y kind of players trying to take over the industry. And what I loved about my experience at all 3 of those companies and here is the opportunity to allow small businesses to have the same tools that maybe 1 or 2 really big players have, and to compete at the same level, but still have kind of the passion and soul that they have for their community and for what they do day to day, their employees, et cetera. And so, I got to see that at working for small doctors' offices who were trying not to get absorbed by major health systems, working for small daycare centers who love taking care of kids and delivering great education. And, now getting to do that for small print shops, trying to fight off the likes of Amazon Merch and the others in the world. And I just love being part of that mission and kind of being part of the company that provides some of those tools that makes that possible.
Farag, this could be a an alternative episode where kind of like a therapy session, or no, not therapy, okay, because you're going through this, right? I mean, just like professionalizing every department, putting management. Because I think what happens to James is any small business is going to try to self-promote somebody into some sort of leadership role, as in like, okay, this person wants to grow, but they can maybe manage our department, or they can manage department or the production. They're a good printer, right? I guess first, Farag, what's been your experience trying to do that in different departments thus far?
So, like we've been dealing with this, and we obviously raised some money. We've got investors coming in. And there's a point in the business that's humbling where like, I am no longer qualified, nor should I be running different departments in the company. I'm not a finance person, I love sales and marketing, but I'm not even like the level of what a VP of sales, like we talk about Kevin Baumgart quite a bit. And so there's this first like big reality check. And a lot of the investors have asked me like, where do you see yourself? Like, would you, if we thought that, you weren't qualified to run the company, would that be okay with you? So I think like the first part of it has been like a very humbling experience to know that like, I use this example. I am one pole in the circus tent, but I have to put other poles up that are bigger than me to make our tent as big as possible. So I think that was like reality check number one. Reality check number two was the people that I'm going to bring into the business will know nothing about printing, but they will learn that along the way because the qualities they have from their other experiences are far more valuable than perhaps the actual like ink on a screen. And so that has been another part of like, okay, we just hired a CFO, knew nothing about the industry. Our director of NIL knew a little bit about sports, but knew nothing about printing. Well, a little bit about printing, right? So it's been this whole like, what's the first 90 days look like? And that's what I've been trying to work on is like, how do I help the first 90 days of this new employee in this new industry? And that's been my experience so far as we bring them in. So it's like, it's a very eye-opening experience. James, I'm curious to you, what were the first, and there's a great book called The First 90 Days. I bought it. I haven't read it. I need to read it. James, what was the
first? The first step.
What was the first 90 days for you? Like you're coming into something you don't know much about, maybe a little bit, right? What was that first 90 days? What was that transition like? Was it awkward? Tell us about that.
I think it was awesome. I'm sure it was awkward, maybe more awkward for other people than for me, but I had a great time. For me, I'd say coming in, the most important thing is to be humble. I think maybe that's true in any endeavor, but certainly when you're coming into a new company, there is so much experience, whether it's about the industry or about the customers, the product, the experience, all of those things that are impossible to absorb in 90 days. That the most important thing you have to do is, tip your hat when you're in a moment and just try to absorb that, but also just recognize that other people have it way more than you do. I'd say that from my perspective, having been through, so I've been on both sides. I've been, I've never been the founder, but I've been in businesses where I was like the first 10 employees through an exit. And then I've been in this side where, I've come in kind of after the exit. And having seen both of those perspectives, I'd offer kind of like two observations I think were really important in my 90 days. The first is, and you made a really interesting point about bringing in people with diverse backgrounds. And I do think that gets lost. But I think the question that I always ask is like, what do customers care about? Because customers don't care about what kind of ink we use either. Like they want a cool shirt for their concert, or they want, a great shirt for their team sports. They don't really care. I mean, they may have some lightweight expectations, but they don't know what model of Gildan shirt you're using, and they don't care, right? What they care about is maybe design, or they care about the time it takes to get delivered. And so the first questions I ask is like, what do customers care about? And where can I find people who know how to solve those things? So if my customers care about how quickly can I get shirts, then I don't care if you've done printing before. What I care about is, do you understand supply chain and can you get a product out really quickly? And maybe that means you came from the cereal industry, or you came from, I don't know, like fresh produce where you can't afford to have some things wait. But that I find to be really important, because then you start bringing in these skills that matter to where the outcomes matter to your customers, and you're cross-pollinating different things, different skills into the organization. And the other one for me that is really hard, and I'm a new parent. I've got 3 young kids, and I'm just starting to experience this, but I hear about this from people who have older kids. And I think the analogy is really true in businesses is you have to take success when the business parts of the business can run without you. And I think that's really hard. Like I experience this with my kids, where it's like, all of a sudden my daughter doesn't need me to get Cheerios for her anymore. She knows how to pour her own Cheerios in a bowl. Very minor moment in my life, but I was like, man, I'm not in control. Like Saturday morning cartoons were like, I got her Cheerios. And that was like, I was doing something important, right? I had a purpose. And now I don't have a purpose. She gets her own cartoon. She turns off the TV on all by herself, and she doesn't need me anymore. And it hurt a little bit. But on the other hand, taking pride in the fact that, she's made this minor accomplishment. And I think it's probably, in the child analogy, more meaningful as you get later in life. But in the business world, I think if you can shift your perspective to say, it's not me doing this, right? But it's me enabling other people to go do things that matter for our customers and deliver great value to them. And you can take a lot of pride in that. And it takes a hard time to do that. But I think if you do those 2 things, and that's kind of what I focused on in my first 90 days, was like getting us to a point as an organization where we're doing those things. Then you've really built a team that will go beyond the 90 days and hopefully, be great for 9 years or at least 9 months.
Bruce, what was that like as a founder for you? Like this is your baby, there's a bust of your head that travels around the United States or world. Which I have some questions about later, but you were obviously like going through the acquisition and stuff. What was that like for you when they said, hey, like, or did you say, I think we need a CEO? What was that like for the founder?
No, I was not the right person for that role. I think like it's interesting because James, we talk about this theory of what is the exit strategy. It's this video that Rob Dyrdek actually made. I'm sure James is a previous skater as well, or maybe a little current when you have time. But
all the kids call me the old guy when I go to the skate park now. My ego can't handle that.
All right,
they are very young too. When you go there, you're like, should I be here? Like, what is going on? I don't remember this.
They don't hold back.
Yeah, I don't remember this at all. There's a moment of what do you want longer term, and it's not as far as like a sale, but like he was talking about like what are you passionate about to actually do day to day. So, and then building the business around that to go towards the long term. I think we're all very much so focused on week to week, or maybe even day to day of just getting things through, getting orders out. But we sort of forget about what does next year, or like the next 5 or 10 years even look like. Like, do we want to work, 20 hours a week and cash flow really well and the owner makes a good salary and take home? Or does the owner are you super, I've seen some shop owners really passionate about printing, right? And they want to be super involved in that and be testing new things. And I think that, Danny from, well, I guess his shop's not Denver Print House, but whatever his new shop is, he's very passionate about the printing process and the chemistry behind it, and new techniques. And that's where he carves his niche in, and then he'll hire somebody else to manage sales and stuff. But I think James specifically brought in some really good experience of being able to combine multiple businesses, manage multiple departments at scale, and then be able to take that to, let's call it a $50 million business, right? Way down the road, something like that. And that, to be honest, for me is kind of cool to learn from. But I'm going back, like even to a business that's, call it 500 to $1 million. Like that's when you jumped into Campus Ink, right? It's Farag. Okay, so what if we could talk about the journey of professionalizing the business and like creating the process, creating the true management? When do you think that's a good time? Like, and maybe James, is when you've seen it, because there's too early where the business literally can't afford it, and it probably may not even have the process for somebody to jump in, or there's too late. And I think it depends maybe on the department too. So maybe first, Stephen, in that period when you joined, were there people that you feel like could have helped to be a true manager to really professionalize it? And then I'm curious on your thoughts.
I think like, okay, they brought me into the business, my business partners are twice my age, and they had said like, we're going to let Stephen run this and we'll focus on the printing or whatever. And so like, I was, I guess, junior CEO in training at the time, to start to give a mission, vision, strategy to the company. But I think the first thing that I was doing, so like, okay, after getting my feet wet, learning about printing, was like uncovering founder bias or founder mistakes. What are the glaring things that the founders that have been doing? So if you're a print shop owner and your kid's coming into the business, they're going to point out things to you and say, Mom and Dad, why are we doing it this way? Like, it's 2022. There's no, and that was the first decision we made, was like, we have to get on Printavo. But that was like the first, was just uncovering these like rocks and pebbles that have created bad habits in the business, whether it's customer communication, and it wasn't on printing technique. It was everything except for printing, delivery speeds, right? Like answering emails, proofs, approvals, all the stuff that was common to me, but not common to them. I think that was like the first big phase was, and then, probably.
So is that more process thing then, less of a person managing something? Because it sounds like the other owners were managing the production side anyway.
Yeah, they were managing the production, but it was just like me being kind of a surgeon, and then getting them. I think the hardest part, Bruce, that we struggled with was getting them to accept it. Like, hey guys, I think we need to send out proofs before we print. Well, we've never sent out proofs before we print, like, okay, well, that's not going to go well, or things like that, or we need to get on the GraphX, or we need to do that. So I think like step number one for me was probably like 1 or 2 years of just me, and getting their trust and getting them to kind of let go of the vine or whatever, like they say in traction, right? And then after a couple of years of that, then it was time for us to start saying, okay, what are the hiring decisions? What are the managing moves? All that stuff. I guess, James, from your standpoint, how often is it that you see a business just being crippled by mistakes that the self-proclaimed founders are making?
Yeah. My totally uninformed opinion is that I think that founders, help and hurt probably in equal portions. I wouldn't say it's all one or the other, but there are a couple of things that I think are important questions to ask. And the first one in my mind is, does the thing that you need to solve, whether that's production or logistics or customer service or, sales, whatever it might be, do you need a team or do you need an individual? And I think too often people don't start there. They start with, let's solve it. Oftentimes, especially at small scale, you need an individual. And finding somebody who's a great individual is very different than finding somebody who can build a team. I told Bruce this in a kind of just, I think we were having a drink or something conversation, but I really wanted to start my own company at one point. I thought, man, this would be great. I would love doing this. And then I thought about what that actually entailed. I talked to some people who I really admire as founders, and I went, the idea of locking myself in a room for 13 hours a day and doing stuff that doesn't involve working with other people is like, you remember that book 1984 where they send you to some room and it's like your worst fear ever, and that's like your punishment? Like, that would be my punishment. You just stick me in a room and make me, sit in front of like some kind of website that I'd have to figure out how to program for 13 hours. Like, I would hate it. I love working with people. I love being part of like teams and getting teams built up. So I say all that to say, like, I think oftentimes founders don't think about that, right? So they might hire an individual contributor, and to Bruce's point, they make that person the team leader when he or she never should have been a team leader. They're great at being individual, or they think the problem is you really do need a team. Like, it's a big production organization, right? You need multiple people running presses and doing a variety of other tasks. And instead you put an individual contributor who's great at maybe doing his or her own thing, but would be horrible at managing a team. And so I think not thinking about that dynamic is really important. And that changes by function, and I think it changes by scale. But to answer your earlier question, Bruce, I think in general, when you start early, you're about hiring individual contributors, and you get to the point of now we need teams for all these functions. In my mind, that's really kind of the tipping point. And I don't know where that is in terms of revenue, but I think it's probably a couple million in revenue, somewhere in that range, where you really have to shift your mentality. And then on the founder part, it's an interesting question. I don't know how true my observation is here. But what I would say is that working with founder-owned, privately held businesses versus institutionally owned, whether it's VC or private equity-owned businesses, the difference to me is how you want to discipline the organization. Because if it's a founder-owned business, at the end of the day, you're still going to optimize generally around what is that founder taking home. Maybe now, maybe in the future, but really what that founder is taking home. And that has one set of outcomes. And if you're optimizing around a kind of institutional owner, then what you're really optimizing around is what is the overall value of the business. And those two things are actually different. I think a lot of times people think they're the same thing, but they're actually very, very different. And they cause the team and the company to do things differently as well. And so, I think it's a lot of founders I've talked to have said, like, hey, if, what you really care about, to Bruce's point, is you want to just retire, then you should really bring in investors, because they'll help you focus on creating the most valuable business, which ultimately you can sell and retire on. And if what you really care about is being the master of your domain, then absolutely don't bring in investors, because they're going to be a total pain for you. And you can, kind of optimize the company around your own personal outcomes. And again, I think that's a personal decision, there's not an absolute right or wrong.
There's definitely a dynamic of discipline that you mentioned too. I think, when it's owner operated, it definitely, Farag, we've talked about this a lot, where there's no coach, there's no one you're reporting to, right? So you're doing the best you can, you're pushing things forward, but there's no sort of guardrails to push it forward. Where now we have a board, for example, and so there's definitely guardrails, and there's like a plan of where we want to go longer term, which is funny though, because I think when we were 20 people, we just started to get to a point where I feel like everybody needed a further North Star than this 1 week outlook, that of like solving problems, putting out fires. And from the traction book, we created the 10-year plan, 3-year plan, and then back then the 1-year plan. But that started to help give us a bit of discipline. And I guess where I'm going with this is, like, from a financial perspective, when is it a good point in the business life, Stephen, you first, of like when you feel like you should have created a longer term outlook? And maybe it's just for the year of like, okay, financially every quarter, maybe every month, here's what we should be doing in revenue, and here's basically what I think the expenses are going to be, especially with the seasonality, so there's an understanding of where we're going to be at.
Well, I think it goes back to like kind of what James said, is figure out your outcome, and then you have to build it backwards, right? Like, if it's, look, I want to work 20 hours a week and I want to make 200 grand a year, what do I have to do to get there? And then everything goes back to that starting line. Or the other way, like, I want to get the business to a point where I want to sell it. In order to do that, it's going to take this, and this to professionalize it. So I think really thinking hard about the outcome and the exit, and then you have to like run it back all the way to the starting line. And we ran into this. It was a forced hand once we started raising money, because like the investors started asking us, where do you see your revenue in 18 months, 24 months, 36 months? What are the milestones that you have to hit? And they weren't writing me a check unless they liked what those milestones
you're like getting that text message and then text message of, hey, all these tumblers are missing straws.
Yeah. Like,
what do I do?
What do I do? Like, hey, the shirts didn't get delivered. What do I do? So to that point, once it got legit and crazy, I'm talking to you every day. I'm talking to Kevin Baumgart. I'm talking to my professors at U of I every day. I'm talking to accountants, CFOs, and my best friends that work at Morgan Stanley. And they're helping me model all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, how the hell am I supposed to do this?
But would you have done that? Do you feel like, okay, it was now a good time, or would you have started this like when you were $1 million in sales?
I would not have done that unless I think like
you were forced to.
Necessity is the whatever that term is, right? It was like a forced hand. If the company was going as is, no one would have ever forced me through those exercises.
Yeah.
Like, ever. Right. And I still don't know what I'm doing. I hope no one listens to this, but I still have no idea what I'm doing. And that's why I'm like, okay, shoot, we need a CFO. Like, we have to hire a CFO to do this. James, how did you, like, as I'm learning like what a professional CEO looks like versus like a founder CEO, there are some raw skills that are like super important from a finance standpoint, management standpoint, developmental standpoint. What are your big pillars that you stand on? Are you a big finance guy? Are you more like managerial? I'm not under, I don't know too much about you, but I'm curious to hear.
No, it's a great question. I'll start by saying that I think in general, this is an overgeneralization, but it's one that I'll stick to. Revenue cures almost all problems in a business. So starting with how do we get more sales, I think is always a great pillar to start at. So it depends on the industry. For what we do, a lot of that is about how you build a really authentic outreach to your community so that they trust your brand and they trust the solutions that you're delivering to them. And of course, you've got to deliver, good value in your product. But I think that's different in a screen printing business. I wouldn't, profess to know that I'd like be an expert at it, but I think figuring out how you get more sales is always a great place to start. The second place I would say is, and this is very specific probably to like software, but I do think there's a version of this in the print industry that's equally important, is around product. And when I define product, I go back to where I started before, which is understanding what customers want, not what the industry wants. So if I'm a SaaS guy, product is all about how it's hosted and what kind of agile you use, what language you're writing your software in. Customers don't give a F about whether or not you're using Ruby or, something else or .NET, right? They don't care. And very few will ask you. Maybe some will ask you, but it probably won't even be that important. They'll ask you just to prove that they know how to ask you the question. And so it's really about understanding what is important to them and building things that match that value. And that's, I was using my analogy earlier. If customers don't care what type of shirt and what kind of ink you use, but they care about how quickly it takes to get their shirts, then focus on how quickly you can get them their shirts, right? And so I think focusing on that is like my second pillar. The third one is finance. I think probably the single biggest piece of luck I had in my career, but I was in a finance position. I did working for a public company, so big company, doing all this modeling stuff that you talked about. I've built many models in my career, and I think having that level of understanding has really helped me because ultimately, I think you have to be able to straddle both sides of the world. You have to be in the people, the intangible part of the world where you're dealing with your team and your customers and figuring out how to make that work. But you gotta have the ability to understand how that translates to the bottom line, right? And so for me, like I try to understand, what our month-to-month plan is, have those numbers kind of memorized, and then be able to kind of go back and forth. So if we're talking about doing a great event, I'm like, hey, that's awesome. I know how much we can spend, and I know how many leads we need to get out of it. But I don't have to focus solely on those things. I can also focus on building a really awesome event that people really love. And I think too often people, and maybe it's just like how our monkey brains work, we think in these dichotomies that like either you have to be pure numbers or you have to be kind of pure non-numbers. And the answer is you got to be both. And you got to, I think, be equally balanced between those to be, especially as you get bigger and bigger, because it gets harder to manage things at scale if you're not able to both quantify and be intangible at the same time.
When do you think it's a good time? If we could say, okay, shops, at $1 million in sales a year, roughly, you should start to create your annual budgeting plan. Like, is that do we all think that that's a good number? Is that too late? Is that too soon? At least just something rough to understand, like where we should be at, to understand hiring needs, to understand, to have some sort of, bumper. What do they call it? Bowling,
I think there's
cards?
like head count, Bruce. It's like when the owner no longer is like.
Okay, that's fair. Because if it's retail versus contract printing, there's a little bit difference.
Yeah. Okay. From my perspective, it was when the unknown became too unknown. Like, I knew, when I know I've got 5 employees and my payroll is $20,000 a month or $30,000 a month, like that's a very concrete number. But now it was like commissions are starting to get high, remote employees. How much is this? What does healthcare cost? What is this? And those are like these unknowns that start to just bubble and inflate.
Yeah.
And that's when it started to get scary for me. When it was nice and small and everyone was under one roof and I could talk to everyone every day, I didn't feel like I necessarily needed that.
Okay, so maybe it's not a number. It's literally a feeling.
I'd maybe just building on the feeling. There's a really simple test in my mind that, so I've been lucky enough to also help some other companies get started. And this is the test I've always used with the founders there. I say, okay, like, let's use your $1 million. So you're doing $1 million in revenue. Let's say you've got $800,000 in expenses, right? It's pretty good margin business, right? I would ask the founder, okay, you spent $800,000 last year, or on a run rate basis, whatever the measure is, but you spent $800,000 last year. Can you, let's say 80% of that, so $640K, can you tell me what you spent $640K on? And if the answer is no, you can't tell me what you spent $640K on, you need a financial plan, because the business has gotten to a scale where you're not able to manage it by feel and by head and by memory, right? And so I don't know what that number is. And maybe that number is different by individuals, right? Like maybe some people could, or I know some super detail oriented people who could probably keep track of $5 million of expenses in their head. For me, it's probably like, I think I'd probably start losing track at 200,000 just because like I don't track those things all that well in my head. So I think it's a little bit relevant to who's doing it, but I think the answer is still the same. If you can't honestly out of your head or out of memory say what you're spending money on, then you need a plan to go figure it out.
Steven, last month, go. Top 10 items.
I don't want to know.
Tape.
It gets like the bigger it gets once lines of credit start to come into place and AR, and payables and receivables and royalties and licensing and all that kind of stuff. It gets scary really, really quickly. And I was talking to Brett Bowden about it, and he's like, the time and energy it takes to run a $4 million company, a $7 million company is generally like the same. Getting from 4 to 7. Bruce, you tweeted about this the other day. That's the hardest part.
Very expensive.
It is very expensive because you're learning for the first time and you're like, oh shit, moments are coming out. So, James, can we chat a little bit about like how? Okay, so like you're the CEO of Inksoft and Printavo. How is that? We can maybe be vulnerable for a second. That was definitely a bomb drop, and for Bruce to tell me, he had to tell me in person. He wouldn't tell me that over the phone. What was that like for you? How much backstory did you have going into it? I think it's super interesting.
Good, bad, tricky.
Yeah. I'd say I had like an academic appreciation for, because I had heard both stories, right? I mean, I obviously had a chance to talk to Bruce and talk to Scott and JP before I joined and hear their stories and hear their perspective of the other. And but you can only get so far in hearing a story, right? Because I just hadn't personally experienced it. And on the other hand, coming in from outside, I think I had a leg up in that I was just kind of like, well, we got to make this work, right? Like, I think I used the analogy early on. It was a little bit of like an arranged marriage. It was like, guys, divorce is not an option, right? So we got to figure out how to be happy and have some kids. Let's sit down and figure this out. And I think maybe not having a bias one way or the other was actually a real advantage there. The other thing, though, I would say I would just give a tremendous amount of credit to all of the team for both companies, especially the folks who had been with both those companies for a really long time. I think the easy path would have been to just say, I'm better than you, or I don't want to work with you, or whatever, right? And on the other hand, I think what actually happened was everybody, for the most part, gave the other team the benefit of the doubt. And when they did that, they realized like, oh, we're a lot closer than we are dissimilar, and we can, more importantly, we've got a vision where we can do great things for our existing customers and for the industry and those customers who aren't our existing customers if we really combine forces in a way that we couldn't have done independently. So let's go do that, because that sounds way better than, bickering with each other. And that was really cool to see that come together. And I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. I think we just had a great team that did that sort of organically.
How do you see the two starting to like work off each other? Obviously, it's been pretty clear that like, hey, everyone, we're going to run this. They're both going to run independently. What have you started to work on that long-term vision?
Steven wants an integration. He uses both Inksoft and Printavo.
Preaching to the choir, my friend. Preaching to the choir. That's exactly, I think, where we're eventually headed. So the question is by bringing these two companies together, how do we create a technology? So I go back to where I started. I would love to be in a position where any print shop has the same tools available to them that a company that has the ability to do their own in-house software development has. If that's our, guiding star, how do we get there, and how do these two companies together? And the areas where they were clearly overlapping with one another was kind of like, call it e-commerce, web stores, whatever you want to call it. Printavo had merch, Inksoft has their web store solution. And then on the production management side, Printavo has a solution, as does Inksoft. And so I think where we are headed is a world where we'll build on Inksoft's e-commerce and web store capabilities. So focus more of our development resources there and build on Printavo's production management capabilities and build an integration between the two so that as a customer, you can eventually get to a place where they feel seamless, even though, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, I don't think customers care that Inksoft is built on .NET and Printavo is built on Ruby. They just want them to work together, right? And they want an order to come through a web store and to get produced and get shipped out and to make that feel really seamless. And we have a heck of a lot of work to get there, but I think that's the overall guiding vision. And ultimately, the reason I think we can get there faster is because if you think about the two companies being separate, Printavo was trying to build out merch and be better at web stores, and Inksoft was trying to build out production management. And by doing that, neither one of them was getting better at the other thing, right? And now we can take the same amount of resources and get better faster, assuming we can figure out an integration, which we can, but we just need to put our shoulder to grindstone against it.
It's interesting thinking about the whole, it's interesting thinking about the whole coming together. I personally, if you're very competitive or play a sport or something like that, like you just like want to win, and mentally all I want to do is win. And so it took probably like 3 to 6 months for me just to be not like mentally attacking them and I'm sure both ways, right? Because it's like you want to win. There's only 8 or so, maybe 10 different options in the space, but it's been kind of cool to be able to work together.
Bruce, there's been a continuous humming of, we interviewed Mark Kudre last week, of consolidation, acquisition, joining forces with other shops. Like, I think there's a wave coming, if it hasn't already. But I think that you guys have shown the industry that, hey, like, you can actually put something 1 + 1 is 3 here. You could put your heads together and make something bigger. And I've heard tons of murmuring of it everywhere. I guess, James, what advice do you have for shops that are either looking to get acquired or thinking about acquiring someone, or, do you see it a lot in your small businesses, like maybe the daycare industry, stuff like that? I think that's super interesting.
For sure. So daycare went through a very similar trend. Like if you think about daycare, if you've got, it kind of makes sense to maybe have locations across multiple areas, right? You have one in each suburb or in different neighborhoods in a downtown location. And so you would see that happening where people adjacent to one another would start merging together. I think it goes back to where we started earlier in the conversation. We were talking about what does it matter for the owners. If you're looking to retire, and sell, that's one thing. If you're looking to kind of sell but stay on, I think that's the trickier one. In the retire one, I'll just be, I think generally people say things like, care about your legacy. And I'm just like, oh, come on, please. Like, you're selling to sell, like get the best price you can. If you're checking out of the business, if you're selling to stay in, that is a really tricky sell in my opinion, because it's like dating. Everybody will say the right things as part of the deal, and you just really don't know. Once you put a ring on it, like you just don't know what's going to happen 7 years down the road. And people change and all that stuff. And so, the key I would just say is if you're selling to stay in the business is to really focus on, are the partners that you're going to have, whatever that means, the other people who are going to be part of that business, are they the kind of people that you can work through, that you can problem solve with? It's not, do you like them and do you add value? Because the most important thing is, can you solve problems? If you can solve problems together, you'll be okay, because eventually you'll have them and you got to solve them. If you're looking to do an acquisition, that's a bit tricky. And the reason I say that for print shops in general is it's really hard. The reason you would, want to do an acquisition, I think, is to hopefully add some capacity to the business that you don't already have, right? So maybe you're not doing a lot of promotional products business, but there is somebody who is, and that's, additive to what you have because your clients are asking for combined apparel and promo products, or, those kinds of things. I would say the other component that's really tricky is, you got to deal with whoever the seller is. All that to say, I would come back to say, do you have your house in order? Have you done through that thing we were talking about earlier where you figured out, do you need individual contributors or teams? If you've crossed the chasm from individual contributors to building a team and you feel like your team can take on more capacity, then you're probably in a position to do an acquisition. If, on the other hand, you've got some great individual contributors and you're thinking about buying a business, you've now exponentially made your problem more challenging because you haven't even solved how to scale your own business. And now you're going to try to throw in something else. That seems a little bit like a recipe for disaster to me. And you might be better off just figuring out how to scale your own business. So I think it's a lot of case by case, but those are probably the big categories that I would think about as people think about consolidation overall. The last point I'll make is I do think consolidation was accelerated by the market conditions that we were in over the last couple of years, cheap debt, all these other things. And as we get into a more normal environment, it probably slows down a little bit, would be my guess.
We've seen with, is it SNS or was it TSC apparel
TSC,
also?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Augusta has made, 8 different acquisitions. Obviously Custom Ink is on a bit of a buying spree too. But that's kind of interesting thing about buying another business. Because I know, like, Stephen, you've talked about this and, we've had some phone chats of like you considering a couple different businesses for different strategic reasons. But do you think that you guys would be at a point, or what do you feel like you would need to be able to absorb another company? Because I see a lot of folks do it more locally, James, where they're trying to, because so many shops are very locally driven. And so they want to be able to source up more sales, but they're saying, well, I'm only going to get, let's say 50% of the sales actually continue on because there's such an owner sales driven thing that's happening. And so, maybe you collect half, you sell off the equipment that helps pay for some of it. Is there another strategy, Farag, on your end that you've looked at other than sales?
Okay, so I was talking to my dad about this or someone and said, if you took that same amount of money that you want to buy this other company with and you just invested it in what James said, scaling your own business, would you go faster, more responsibly, and actually know what you're doing versus buying someone else's problem and trying to absorb it all?
It's like, what's the best
and
ROI?
not knowing what problems you're buying, by the way, because you'll never know. You're buying a lot of unknown problems.
Yeah, and so like if you took that same amount of time and energy and money and spent it on just doing what you were doing and doubling down on it, would you actually, look down a magic 8 ball and be much happier than acquiring someone else's? I think to James's point, if you are buying into a vertical that you are now adding, right, like promotional products or sublimation or something that you currently weren't doing that now is going to help you be better, kind of like Printavo, Inksoft merch versus production manager. I think that's where it starts to make sense. Like I've been approached by a lot of them now. For some reason, when people hear the word investors, they come flocking, being like, "Buy me, buy me, buy me."
The spam.
Yeah, like the inbox.
Was
the
it that, or
inbox
was it the Ink 5000 thing?
Oh God, Ink 5000. Oh,
It's somehow they allow you to sell, or maybe they just give away your email address after qualifying for
I
that.
don't need business insurance. I don't need credit card processing. If you are listening to this and you found out we were on Ink 5000, please do not call us. And I am the wrong person to call for your services. We could do a whole podcast on Ink 5000. But
I've come up with a reply, by the way. Every time somebody hits me up, I reply. Right now, one of our big challenges is hiring. So I reply with our careers page. I say, if you can refer a candidate who fills one of these job openings, I will do a demo with you. So far, nobody's taken me up on the offer, but I figured I might as well try to get something out of it.
The craziest part about Ink 5000 is you pay like $300-400 to get there, did all the revenue stuff, whatever. They hit you up every day until you actually finish the registration. And then once you win, it's $1,500 to use the logo. I might be a whistleblower for Ink 5000.
Pay to play.
But
They give you a third of all royalties that people haven't paid.
To use a black and white logo is $1,400.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I go give $1,400 to charity instead. No, but anyways, I think it's an interesting topic, and I think a lot of shops are thinking about it. And I think it's important to think about, like you said, Bruce, like having your exit in mind. If you're a shop owner and you've been at it for 15 years, do you have something that you're going to be able to sell, pass off, retire with, cash flow, all that stuff?
Can you buy a company for sales, James? Is that a thing? Like, could a shop, like, could Steven go to another shop in Champaign and be like, we want to buy you guys just because you're doing $1 million a year. We think we can add, maybe half of that onto the bottom line that will stick around over time. Does that make sense? Like that type of arbitrage, or no?
It could. I think you raised the critical point, which is if the majority of those sales are the result of the direct relationship of the founder and or people who aren't going to stay on after the acquisition, then I don't think it almost never makes sense in that scenario. And there are very few businesses where that's not the case, right? Where it's just a pure professional sales team that, they're kind of mercenaries for hire, and they're going to just work for your company after the acquisition. So I think that's really the rub, to be honest with you, with those types of acquisitions.
Bruce, it's different from like Salesforce acquiring Slack than like print shop buying print shop. That's where it's like, is it an asset sale? Are we just buying their equipment and a small book of business, saving a couple employees' jobs?
When you've thought about it, why did you back out?
I think to James's point, what you don't know really scares me. And then really saying, is this just is the more responsible thing to take that same time, money, and energy and put it into my own business? And every time I go back and I'm like, yeah, I was probably just doing my own business.
It's less exciting.
And Bruce, you always say like, oh, but you can grow faster. But you could add $2 million to your top line, but you could add $2.1 million of expenses that you have to cut through and try and rip out and deal with. Like, it's not always just pretty. And this is what someone, I don't know, maybe my dad tells me this, like, someone's selling their business for a reason. If they were crushing it, they probably wouldn't be selling it, right? Like, there is a reason behind every sale. I think it's important to know that. So, yeah.
Okay. Last riff, James. You, as a leader, I've noticed you've done a couple things, and I'll mention if you don't. But a lot of people listening are either managers or small business owners in this space. What are things that we can do as owners that make us a better leader, though?
Sure.
And you can be as honest, direct as possible.
Yeah. I don't, that's kind of the only mode I have. So that's good. The biggest thing I would say is thinking about, and this is a really hard one, but thinking about the business in multiple dimensions. So to use specifically what I mean is, when I think about our mission, I don't think we have a mission. I think we have multiple missions. We have a mission for our customers, which is the most common mission. And I think that's the mission that most people think about. But we also have a mission for our investors. We have a mission for our employees, and we have a mission for the community that we're part of. Right. And those things aren't always aligned, but I think you have to think about them so that you have your North Star, and you have to get the rest of the organization to think about it. Because oftentimes your employees will think, well, what's in it for me, right? But they're not thinking about the mission for your customers, or your investors are what's in it for me, but they're not thinking about the mission for your employees. And so figuring out how you not only have all of those things, but you reconcile them with one another is really, really critical as part of founding the overall organization. The second thing I would say is I'm a firm believer that for me, the best thing, and for any leader, the best thing you can do is build an organization that, as long as it's on the happy path, it works without you. So the proverbial, you get hit by a bus, what happens? You don't ever want that to happen. What I mean by the happy path is nothing's going wrong, right? Blanks are getting delivered on time. All your materials are available. Your equipment is working. Orders are coming in. All of that that garment should come out without you ever being involved. And if you can use that as your own guiding star in building your team, that's great. But the other thing you should do is you should realize that the real value out of the organization isn't managing the happy path. It's building a team and a process that'll do that without you. Mm-hmm. But it's being there to take ownership when the proverbial, hits the fan. And for me, that's really important, because that's what I think so often organizations want out of their leaders, right? Something's gone wrong and they don't want to be the one on the hook. You got to make a tough call, and there's a possibility that you could be right and you could be wrong. And a lot of people don't want to take the risk of being wrong, right? Mm-hmm. You got to be the one who says, all right, guys, we're going to, we can do A or B. We're going to do A. And if A fails, it's on me, but everybody jump on board. Let's go get it done, right? Because something's gone wrong, right? Our inventory hasn't showed up on time. We got an upset customer or whatever. So I think having that dynamic in your head is really, really important. And then the last thing I would say is what I said earlier, but getting to this place where you can balance between the personal kind of component of your business and the financial component of your business, and realizing that they're not mutually exclusive, that in fact they have to be combined with one another. I for some reason, I just got lucky, and I think in my world, and I just think that way, but I so often talk with people who are like, oh, I don't want to talk about the numbers, right? Or other people who are like, don't tell me about so-and-so, having some personal problem. They're row 148 on the budget spreadsheet. And both of those extremes are wrong, right? The reality is that both those things have to coexist, because you have to deliver a bottom line, and you have to take care of your customers and your people. And you have to, the reason you're in the seat you're in is because you're the one who's going to figure out how to do all of that simultaneously. Or as Bruce, you probably heard me say, I like this phrase. I don't know where I got this one, but you're going to make everybody equally unhappy in the worst case, right? Sometimes that's the best possible outcome. But you got to get there, and if you can accept that sometimes that's going to be the conclusion of the day, I think that's a good thing too. What
about any also super small things? Like one thing I've noticed you do, and also Stephen, you told me about this. So basically, if you want somebody to come to a conclusion, you tend to ask a lot of questions for them to come to the conclusion on their own. And I think, Stephen, you helped me work through this, because we had somebody that we let go a while ago. But the thing is, though, is that I will actually get a little bit impatient of doing that, like over time. And so I'll just blurt it out in just a minute, which isn't great. But so are there any other very small things like that you feel like are helpful, or that things that you've picked up over time or learned from others?
My grandma once told me, my grandma was this very Irish Catholic lady, and she used to call me Jimmy. She said, Jimmy, patience is a virtue you have yet to receive. And I think she is very true about that, but I struggle with being patient. It is so hard to ask those questions. But for me, I think it's just about how do you flip it in? You said you want to win. I love to freaking win. So I said, okay, this is how I'm going to have to win, right? The way I'm going to have to win is I'm going to have to grit through 2 hours of asking questions when I already know what the answer is. Yeah. But that's the way that this team is going to get there. So I just say, just always kind of refocus maybe on the goals. Asking questions. But I actually don't think that that's a universal truth. I think it's really about understanding who the team is, right? So well, let's use a very personal Printavo example, right? One of the things that we're struggling with right now is having a long-term roadmap. I think I know how to do a roadmap. I'll just this is going to be a very arrogant statement. And I did this whole, I gave everybody a Word doc and it had a bunch of things on there. And I was like, this is the play, just go do this. And everybody came back and was like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go do this other thing, right? And I'm like, yeah, this other thing is not going to work, but maybe I'm wrong. I could admit that, right? I could be wrong. Maybe it will work. But more importantly, even if it doesn't work, people are bought into it and they're excited about it. And they're doing a lot of things that overlap with the play I want to call. And so at the end of the day, maybe you'll stub your toes, a few times, and maybe we won't get to the end product we really want to get to, but we will have accomplished a lot of what I wanted to accomplish anyway. And more importantly, I think people will have learned a lot and grown as a team. And as a business, we can afford to make some mistakes right now, right? On the other hand, one of the other things we really have to do, I think, is start getting events up and running, trade shows, getting those back in order. That's an area where I don't think we have a lot of room, right? We got a trade show in 3 weeks or something like that. And then we've got Print Hustlers and
Bruce
and
not be in charge of your palette anymore. Because for some reason that makes it back to my warehouse and it's always a shit show. So James, if you want to just on the
first of all,
roadmap,
I don't understand why I don't understand why the skids come in multiple pieces
at logistics.
They have
Okay, you suck.
Something happened. I think someone disassembles the skid and puts them onto two.
Literally, the Achilles heel at Campus Ink is the Printavo boot that comes in pieces, wrapped, not even wrapped. It looks like a third grader making an ice cream cone. Anyway,
I gotta call.
We don't have time to iterate there, right? We're calling plays and we're like, guys, we got to get this figured out.
That's
and
fair.
We're
gonna send Bruce, James, back in the old days. Bruce would go to Walmart, buy the trade show, and then return it on the weekend.
Allegedly.
That was some money saving activities. But I think to your point, the whole you're going to lay out what your vision is and the team's going to either accept it or not. And if it comes out of their mouth, there's a better chance that, there's a better chance that they'll believe in it. And I think that's something Bruce and I had struggled with is ask, don't tell, try to get them to come up with everything you want to hear, but you can't actually say the words. And if you can do that, then that's management. Right. So, I think
and that whole North Star challenge that you talked about, that's actually the biggest trap that I think a lot of people fall into. They say, well, everybody wants a North Star. I need to give them a North Star. But if you think about what you just said, you can't give them a North Star because inherently they're not going to believe it, right? They have to believe what the North Star is. And that's why I said, that's why you have to, in my mind, you have to differentiate between what North Star, who are you talking about the North Star? There are different North Stars, right? Those are the four groups I like to think about, but there could be even, subgroups within that, within customers, there's different kinds of customers, right? And so letting the team, I think, get through that. And instead of saying, yes, you're right, we're going to go get you a North Star, instead of saying, okay, we're going to figure out this North Star together. I think those kinds of exercises is painful and as much patience as they require. And I hope my grandmother is listening, realizing that I've taken her advice and I'm trying to be more patient. But I do think it makes you a better manager.
And by the way, for the skid thing, I must have put the plastic wrap around at least 8-10 times. I don't know what what happened. I got a call from some random company in Illinois that said, "Hey, we've got a couple things from yours from the last couple of months in our warehouse." And I was like, Who are you? And they were some trucking company, in the middle of Illinois. And I'm like, and what is it? And they're like, it looks like random, a TV box and looks like a trade show, box for me. And I was like, oh my God, because half of it was gone when we were at the last trade show. And who knows how it ended up there, but I just wanted to make it clear. I'm learning. I'm improving my logistic.
If you could put that on Bruce's performance review, it is okay.
I mean, it's on the record. We've got it recorded.
Yeah,
right?
if you could document that the way he wraps the skids he really could work on it. But that's okay. We'll forgive him. He's doing a good job.
Podcasting's your thing, Bruce. Let's we'll figure out how to wrap skids.
Yeah, we'll ask Mark. Maybe Matt can handle that for us next time. All right. Thanks for joining us, James. This is James, our new CEO of Printavo and Inksoft, aka Inktovo. Very excited. Thank you for the time. Got Mr. Stephen Farag out of Campus Ink in a really cool hotel something. I like the backdrop. Is that a green screen or no?
I'm in San Diego.
Little family
Family vacation.
We appreciate you guys. I'm Bruce from Printavo. We'll see you guys on the next Printavo Pronouncers podcast episode. All right. Thanks.